The fluorescent lights of Voss Dynamics Analytics Division hummed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over endless rows of cubicles. The city outside was waking to rain, streaking the glass walls with ribbons of silver, but inside, the office was as bright and cold as ever. Clara Wynne blinked hard at the spreadsheet before her, the columns swimming in and out of focus until they blurred into one shimmering wall of numbers. "Come on," she whispered under her breath, rubbing at her eyes. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee, now long gone cold. It tasted like rust and exhaustion, but it was all she had. At 24, Clara had become something of an anomaly at Voss Dynamics, an entry-level data analyst who somehow carried the workload of 3 people without complaint. She'd been at the company barely 9 months, yet her dedication was already whispered about in the break room. "That girl in finance never leaves," they'd say. "She's on some kind of mission." They weren't wrong. Her mission had a name, Noah. 16 years old, bright, gifted, and dying by degrees from a rare kidney condition that their insurance refused to cover anymore. The specialist's bills had eaten through every cent Clara had saved since college. She'd sold her car, canceled her phone plan, skipped lunches until hunger became a dull ache she ignored. Rent was always late, but she made sure Noah's treatments weren't. "Clara?" A voice broke through her thoughts. Diane, from the next cubicle over, leaned on the partition wall, frowning. "You look awful. When's the last time you took a break?" Clara forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Just need to finish this quarterly model before lunch." "Lunch?" Diane gave a disbelieving snort. "You mean the granola bar you've been nursing since Tuesday? You're going to burn out, girl." Clara laughed softly, hoping it sounded convincing. "Already did. This is just the smoke." She turned back to her monitor, willing herself to focus. 2 more hours, she told herself. 2 more hours, then she could leave, swing by the pharmacy, and head home to Noah. Maybe, if she was lucky, the rain would stop by then. Her vision swam again. She blinked hard, but the office seemed to tilt slightly. Her hands felt cold, her heartbeat uneven. She swallowed against the sudden wave of dizziness. "Clara?" Diane's tone sharpened. "I'm okay," Clara said quickly, forcing herself upright. But as she reached for her water bottle, her fingers slipped. It clattered to the floor, water spilling across the tiles. "Oh, sorry," she murmured, crouching to pick it up. The movement sent a violent rush of blood to her head. The room spun. Black dots danced before her eyes. "Clara." Diane's voice seemed to come from somewhere far away, distorted, like a voice underwater. Clara tried to speak, to tell her she was fine, but her tongue felt heavy. Then the world tilted sideways, and cold tile met her cheek. Everything went dark. Across the city, Ethan Voss stood before a boardroom window 40 floors up, the skyline reflected in the glass behind him. At 34, he was one of the youngest CEOs in the tech industry, a man whose innovations had made Voss Dynamics a global powerhouse. Colleagues called him a visionary. The press called him the reluctant heir, the man who had inherited his father's empire and rebuilt it into something cleaner, more ethical, more humane. But Ethan rarely read the press. "Sir." His assistant, Gregory, entered the room quietly, a phone pressed to his ear. "There's been an incident on the 17th floor. One of the analysts collapsed. They've called paramedics." Ethan turned from the window, his sharp profile illuminated by the rain-dimmed light. "Which department?" "Analytics." Clara Wynne. Something in the name tugged at him, faint but familiar. He'd seen it in quarterly reports, one of the analysts responsible for the data models that had saved the company millions this quarter. "Get the elevator ready," Ethan said, already striding toward the door. By the time he reached the analytics floor, a small crowd had gathered. The hum of gossip and concern filled the air. Clara lay unconscious near her desk, her face pale as porcelain, a paramedic kneeling beside her checking vitals. "Make some room," Ethan ordered quietly, and the employees parted instinctively. He crouched beside her, noting the faint tremor in her hands even in unconsciousness. A half-eaten granola bar sat on her desk, beside a notebook full of neatly written equations and hand-drawn budget corrections. "She's dehydrated and hypoglycemic," one paramedic said briskly. "We'll take her to St. Helena's for observation." "Do you know her emergency contact?" another asked. A woman from HR shook her head. "Her file lists a brother. Noah Wynne. 16. No other family nearby." Ethan frowned. "She lives alone with her brother." "That's what we understand, sir." The paramedics lifted Clara gently onto the stretcher. For a fleeting second, her lashes fluttered. Her eyes opened, gray, glassy with confusion. She looked straight at Ethan. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Don't fire me." Ethan felt the words hit like a blow. "You're not being fired," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear. "You're safe." Her eyes closed again, and the paramedics wheeled her away. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, the office murmuring with speculation. Ethan remained standing beside Clara's desk, his expression unreadable. He noticed the state of her workstation, papers stacked with obsessive precision, a family photo in a cheap frame, and a worn leather bag tucked under the desk. "Sir," Gregory said gently. "Should I handle the HR follow-up?" Ethan shook his head. "No. I'll take care of it." When Gregory hesitated, Ethan added quietly, "This company runs on people like her, not people like me. I want to know what pushed her this far." Hours later, Ethan sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering beyond the rain-streaked glass. Clara's name glowed on his computer screen as he scrolled through her personnel file. Clara Wynne, age 24. Analyst 2, Financial Data Division. Performance, exceptional. Attendance, perfect. Overtime, consistent, unclaimed. Dependents, 1, minor brother, Noah Wynne. Emergency contact, same address. No other family. No notes of misconduct. No warnings. Only excellence, and silence. Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He'd seen hundreds of employee profiles, but something about this one stayed with him. Maybe it was the photograph in her file, bright smile, tired eyes. Or maybe it was the way she had begged not to be fired as she slipped into unconsciousness. He had heard desperation before, but never like that. He turned toward the framed photograph on his desk, Elena, his late wife. Her smile in that photo was all sunlight and compassion. She had once told him, "The strength of a company isn't in its profits, Ethan, it's in how it protects the fragile." He exhaled slowly, the memory cutting through the isolation that had ruled his life for 2 years since her death. "Protect the fragile," she had said. He picked up the phone. "Gregory, find out which hospital Clara Wynne was taken to." A pause. "Sir, do you want me to send flowers?" "No," Ethan said, staring out at the blurred city lights. "I'll go myself." He ended the call, slipping his coat from the back of his chair. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining beneath the streetlights. As the elevator doors closed around him, Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the weight of his grief, a faint, reluctant pull of concern. He told himself it was professional duty. But as the elevator descended, he already knew it wasn't. The automatic doors of St. Helena's Hospital slid open with a whisper, releasing a gust of cold, antiseptic air. Ethan Voss paused on the threshold. The familiar scent hit him like a blow, a cocktail of disinfectant, metal, and memory. He hadn't set foot in a hospital since the night his wife died 2 years earlier. For a moment, he considered turning back. He could send HR, make a donation in the girl's name, have someone else handle the welfare paperwork. That was what a CEO was supposed to do, delegate compassion the way he delegated contracts. But the image of Clara Wynne, pale and trembling on the office floor, refused to leave him. He straightened his shoulders and walked to the reception desk. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for a patient, Clara Wynne. She was brought in from Voss Dynamics earlier today." The nurse looked up from her terminal, polite but guarded. "Are you family?" "No," Ethan replied. "I'm her employer. I'm afraid we can't release medical details to non-family members." Ethan opened his mouth to argue when a voice called from behind him, brisk and professional. "Mr. Voss. I'm Dr. Anya Sharma. We spoke on the phone." He turned to see a petite woman in a lab coat, tablet in hand. Her expression was that practiced mixture of empathy and efficiency unique to physicians who dealt with bad news for a living. "She's stable," Dr. Sharma continued as they shook hands. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion. She's been under extreme physical and emotional stress." Ethan frowned. Was there any underlying condition? "Only poverty," the doctor said quietly. She mentioned caring for a younger brother with a chronic illness. She's been skipping meals to cover his treatment costs. The bluntness of it left Ethan silent. All his corporate philanthropy reports, all those neatly packaged charity initiatives, suddenly felt hollow compared to one young woman starving herself to keep her brother alive. "She's resting now," Dr. Sharma added. "You can see her for a few minutes, but please, keep it brief." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, doctor." They walked down a corridor lined with muted paintings meant to look comforting. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above them. Every step seemed to echo with ghosts, Elena's laughter, the soft beeping of monitors, the final whispered goodbye he had never fully recovered from. Room 213. Clara lay half reclined in the hospital bed, her skin almost translucent against the white sheets. An 4 drip hung beside her, feeding slow, steady life back into her veins. For a moment, Ethan hesitated in the doorway, struck by how young she looked, barely out of college, yet already carrying the weight of survival like someone twice her age. Her eyes fluttered open. Confusion flickered, then recognition. "Mr. Voss." Her voice was hoarse, uncertain. He stepped closer. "You should be resting." Clara tried to sit up, wincing slightly as the 4 tugged at her arm. "I'm so sorry about what happened. I must have caused such a scene. It won't happen again, I promise." "That's not why I'm here," Ethan said. "You don't owe anyone an apology." Color rose faintly in her cheeks. "Then, why are you here?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain the impulse that had brought him. "Because you're one of my people. And because no one should collapse from hunger while working for my company." Her eyes widened. Shame flickered there, quickly masked by defiance. It's not your fault. Things have been tight. My brother's treatments are expensive, and I couldn't, she trailed off, swallowing hard. It doesn't matter. It matters, Ethan said gently. Clara looked away, blinking back tears. Noah's only 16. The doctors say his kidney function's dropping fast. There's a clinical program that could help, but it costs more than I make in 6 months. She laughed once, bitterly. So I work. I work until I forget how hungry I am. The rawness of her confession hit Ethan like a physical thing. He remembered Elena during her last weeks, gaunt, determined, smiling through pain she couldn't afford to show. Compassion and helplessness had been twin weights on his chest then, and they pressed on him again now. You shouldn't have to do this alone, he said quietly. Clara gave a small, exhausted smile. Everyone says that, but in the end, we're all alone with our problems, aren't we? Maybe, Ethan murmured. But maybe not always. A nurse entered, adjusting the monitors with a professional glance toward Ethan. Visiting hours are almost over. He nodded and turned back to Clara. You'll take the rest of the week off, on full pay. Her brow furrowed. Sir, that's not necessary. I can come back tomorrow. It's not a request, Ethan said. It's policy, as of 5 minutes ago. She gave a startled little laugh. You can't just make new policies. I can, he said, and for the first time in a long while, a trace of humor softened his features. Perks of the title. The nurse smiled faintly at that, finishing her checks before slipping out. The silence that followed was gentle, almost companionable. Mr. Voss, Clara said after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. For coming. Most CEOs wouldn't bother. He met her gaze. Most CEOs never watched someone they loved die in a hospital bed because no one cared enough soon enough. Her expression shifted, sympathy and curiosity mingling, but she didn't pry. Instead, she simply nodded, understanding more than words conveyed. When he left the room, Ethan paused in the hallway, steadying himself against the wall. The antiseptic smell clung to his clothes. He exhaled shakily, realizing his hands were trembling. The visit had ripped open something he'd spent 2 years sealing shut. Dr. Sharma caught up with him near the elevators. You did her more good than you think, she said quietly. She needed to know someone saw her. Ethan gave a brief nod. Send the hospital bills to Voss Dynamics account. All of them. I'll sign. Whatever forms you need. Understood. As the elevator doors closed, Ethan looked down at his reflection in the mirrored interior, pale, tired, eyes shadowed with grief and something new. Not pity. Not guilt. Something softer. He remembered Elena's voice again, don't let the world harden you, Ethan. Grief is only proof you cared once. Care again, and you live again. He had dismissed it then as sentimental idealism. Now, standing in the sterile hum of the hospital, he wasn't so sure. Outside, rain began to fall again, light and steady. He pulled his coat tighter, heading for the car. Through the downpour, the hospital's windows glowed warm behind him, and for the first time in years, he felt something small and persistent stirring in the hollow place grief had left. Not redemption. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the beginning of it. 3 days after her collapse, Clara Wynne stood outside the glass doors of the executive floor of Voss Dynamics, her palms slick with sweat. The receptionist at the top level had greeted her kindly enough, but kindness didn't slow the hammering of her heart. She'd been summoned, personally, by Ethan Voss. The email had been short and unreadable in tone. "Please come to my office Monday morning at 10. We should talk. E. Voss." Clara had barely slept since. She'd imagined every possible outcome, but all roads seemed to end with a cardboard box and security escort. She couldn't blame him if he fired her. She'd fainted in front of the entire floor like some fragile intern. When the double doors finally opened, his assistant, Gregory, offered a polite nod. "He's ready for you, Ms. Wynne." Clara inhaled once, smoothed her thrift store blazer, and stepped into the office. Ethan stood by the window, back to her, the skyline stretching out like a field of glass and steel. The morning light rimmed his silhouette, painting him in soft gray. He turned at her footsteps. "Clara," he said simply. "Please, sit." His tone wasn't cold, but it carried the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. Clara obeyed. "I'm glad to see you on your feet again," he said, taking the seat opposite her. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she lied. The truth was that her legs still trembled every time she climbed a flight of stairs. "I'm very sorry for what happened. I should have taken better care of myself." "That's not what concerns me," Ethan replied. "What concerns me is that someone in my company felt she had to work herself into the ground just to survive." Clara's throat tightened. "Please, Mr. Voss. I don't want pity. I just need my job. I can assure you it won't happen again." He studied her, expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he said, "You're not losing your job. In fact, I'd like to offer you another one." Clara blinked. "Another one?" "A promotion." The word hung in the air like something foreign. Ethan opened a leather folder on his desk, revealing a tidy stack of documents. "My executive assistant, Marlene, is retiring next month. I need someone competent, discreet, and disciplined to replace her. I've reviewed your record. You exceed every metric." I don't understand," she stammered. "I work in analytics. I don't have administrative training." "What you have is endurance," Ethan interrupted. "Organization. Reliability. You see the details others overlook." Her stomach fluttered between disbelief and suspicion. "You barely know me." "That's not true," he said quietly. "I've read your reports. I've seen your numbers, your late-night submissions, your revisions on data you weren't even assigned to check. You care about precision. So do I." Clara hesitated, hands twisting in her lap. "Is this, because of the hospital?" Ethan met her eyes, steady. "Partly. It reminded me that my company's supposed to stand for something more than profit margins." Her voice wavered. "Mr. Voss, I can't accept a promotion out of guilt." "It's not guilt," he said. "It's recognition." Silence stretched. Clara searched his face for ulterior motives and found none, only an exhaustion she recognized. The exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying grief too long. He pushed a form toward her. "The position doubles your salary. Full benefits. Coverage for dependents, including siblings." Clara froze. "Coverage, for dependents?" "Yes," he said. "It means your brother's treatment would be fully insured under the company's health plan." For a moment, the words didn't register. Then her eyes filled with tears. She tried desperately to blink away. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan's jaw flexed. Because talent shouldn't have to destroy itself to survive. And because I can. She managed a shaky laugh. You make it sound simple. It's not, he said, his voice softer now. But it's right. Clara's mind raced. The offer was salvation, too perfect, too sudden. A doubled salary meant Noah's next surgery could be booked. A dependent plan meant she could stop living in fear of one missed payment. And yet, a knot of unease twisted in her chest. What about the rest of your staff? She asked. Wouldn't this look like favoritism? It's not favoritism if it's earned, Ethan replied. Still, you'll shadow Marlene for a month. If it doesn't work, we'll revert to your previous position. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally she said, very softly, I don't want to disappoint you. You won't. Their eyes met across the desk, something unspoken sparking there, trust tentative, fragile. An hour later, Clara found herself in the executive corridor again, holding an employment agreement she could hardly believe was real. Gregory escorted her to HR for paperwork, chatting about schedules and training, but his voice was a blur. She kept thinking of Ethan's expression, how it had softened when she spoke of Noah, how quickly he'd looked away when emotion threatened to show. The elevator doors closed. In the mirrored surface, she saw her own reflection, drawn, pale, yet strangely luminous. Hope looked unfamiliar on her. That evening, her apartment felt warmer than usual, though the heater still rattled like a dying engine. Noah was propped on the couch with his laptop, music software open, headphones askew. Hey, he said, grinning. You're home early. That's suspicious. Clara laughed, hanging up her coat. Don't get used to it. He eyed her carefully. What happened? You're smiling weird. She joined him on the couch. I got a promotion. No way. Way. She showed him the contract. Executive assistant to the CEO. Noah whistled low. That's huge, right? Huge, she admitted. The new salary means your treatments. Stop, he interrupted gently. You don't have to do everything for me, Clara. She brushed his hair back affectionately. I know. But maybe, just once, I can. Breathe. They sat together in silence for a while, listening to the soft hum of traffic below the window. Noah spoke again, quieter. You look happy. Haven't seen that in a while. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just tired. But as she looked down at the contract resting on her lap, the lifeline she hadn't dared hope for, she felt a flicker of something deeper. Gratitude, yes. But also curiosity. About the man behind the title. The man who'd walked into a hospital instead of sending flowers, who spoke of right instead of risk, who carried sadness like a second skin. Somewhere between duty and mercy, something had begun to shift. She didn't know it yet, but the day she fainted on that office floor had altered both their lives forever. The first month in Ethan Voss's inner orbit felt like stepping into another world. The executive floor moved to a rhythm entirely different from the humdrum of the analytics department, slower, quieter, yet charged with an invisible current of importance. Conversations were brief, decisions final. And now, Clara Wynne found herself at its center. Her new desk sat just outside Ethan's glass-walled office. Every morning at 7:45, she arrived before him, arranging the day's files in meticulous order, project updates, investor briefs, philanthropic inquiries. By the time the elevator chimed at 8, coffee was poured, appointments scheduled, and the first wave of executives already waiting for his signature. It should have been overwhelming. But strangely, Clara thrived under the pressure. There was something steadying about precision, about knowing exactly where each piece fit in a world that often refused to make sense. Except for one piece, the secret she carried beneath her heart. She was 11 weeks pregnant. And no one could know. The first few weeks had been manageable, a wave of nausea here, a skipped lunch there. She hid the morning sickness with peppermint tea and sheer willpower. Her wardrobe had shifted subtly toward loose blouses and structured jackets. No one noticed. Not yet. But the secrecy weighed on her. Every time Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity or concern, her stomach tightened with guilt. He had changed her life with a single act of generosity. And she was lying to him every day. It wasn't shame that made her hide it, only fear. Fear of losing the job that kept Noah alive. Fear of being seen as fragile, unreliable, unfit for the pace of his world. Still, there were moments, brief, disarming moments, when she forgot to be afraid. One afternoon, a late meeting ran past dusk. The rest of the staff had gone home, leaving only the low hum of city lights beyond the windows. Clara stood beside Ethan's desk, reading off the final notes from a financial report while he signed documents in his crisp, deliberate hand. "You've saved me 3 hours of sorting," he said without looking up. "It's my job." "It's more than that," Ethan replied. "I've had 3 assistants before you. None could anticipate half as much." Clara smiled faintly. "That's because I overthink everything." "That's an asset," he said simply, glancing up. "At least here." Their eyes met across the desk. The faint glow of the city reflected in the glass behind him, outlining his face in soft blue light. Something unspoken lingered there, recognition, maybe, or a fragile trust that neither quite knew how to name. The moment broke when her stomach tightened suddenly, a sharp cramp she tried to mask. Her hand brushed her abdomen instinctively. Ethan noticed. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said too quickly. "Just a long day." He watched her for a heartbeat longer, then nodded. "Go home, Clara. Get some rest." When she left the office, she found herself trembling, not from fear, but from the strange warmth that had passed between them, as fragile and luminous as the city lights below. The next week tested her resolve. The company was preparing for a charity gala in partnership with the Voss Foundation, a tradition begun by Ethan's late wife, Elena, to support pediatric oncology. The event was both personal and public, and Ethan had avoided it since her passing. "Confirm my absence," he said curtly one morning as Clara handed him the invitation. "They're honoring you this year," she replied softly. "For the Foundation's new hospital wing." He froze, pen poised mid-signature. Then declined gracefully. Clara hesitated, then took a breath. "With respect, sir, maybe you shouldn't. People still speak about what you and Elena built together. Showing up would mean something." His gaze lifted to hers, steady, unreadable. "You think grief can be managed like public relations?" "No," she said quietly. "But maybe it can be healed, little by little." The air between them stilled. Then, to her surprise, Ethan exhaled slowly. "You're braver than most of my advisors, Ms. Wynne." "Braver, or foolish?" He almost smiled. "Sometimes those are the same thing." It was the first time she'd seen humor in him. The first time his armor cracked. And it did something unexpected inside her, something tender, dangerous. After that day, their working relationship shifted in subtle ways. Ethan began to include her in higher-level meetings. He asked her opinions, not just for efficiency but because he seemed to value her perspective. She found herself speaking freely, forgetting the boundaries that once terrified her. When the board complimented a new project schedule, Ethan deflected the praise. That was Clara's work. When he attended a press interview, he requested she accompany him, to make sure I don't say something disastrous. And yet, despite the growing ease between them, there were still walls neither dared to breach. He rarely spoke of his late wife, and she never mentioned the life growing inside her. But secrets have gravity. They pull at everything around them. One Friday evening, after an exhausting day of back-to-back meetings, Ethan called her into his office again. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The Foundation's board has asked that I attend the Children's Hospital Gala next month," he said. "I've decided to go." Clara blinked, startled. "That's good news." He nodded once. "I'd like you to accompany me." She froze. "Sir." Strictly in a professional capacity, he clarified quickly, seeing her expression. "These events can be difficult. Having someone I trust manage introductions and schedules would help." Clara forced her voice steady. "Of course. I'd be honored. Speak with HR about the attire budget," he added. "They'll arrange something appropriate." She nodded, trying to appear composed. "Understood." When she left his office, her mind swirled. The gala, the most public event of the year. Photographs, cameras, scrutiny. By then, she'd be almost 4 months along. The Empire waist dresses she favored would only disguise so much. In her apartment that night, she stood before the mirror, running a hand over her barely rounded abdomen. It was still small enough to hide. For now. Noah stirred on the couch. "You're working late again." She turned toward him, forcing a smile. "Something like that." "Don't overdo it," he said sleepily. "You always push too hard." Clara brushed his hair fondly. "It's for you. Always for you." He smiled, drifting back to sleep. But as she watched him, a wave of exhaustion washed through her. The weight of every choice pressed down, her brother, her unborn child, the job that tethered them all together. She touched her stomach again, whispering into the quiet, "Just a little longer. I promise." Outside, rain traced silver lines down the windowpane. Across the city, in his penthouse suite, Ethan Voss stood before another window, the same rain streaking the glass. He, too, could not sleep. He told himself his restlessness was business. But the image that refused to leave his mind was not a balance sheet. It was Clara Wynne, her quiet strength, her unguarded conviction, the faint tremor in her voice when she spoke of hope. He had built an empire on logic. Yet something about her defied logic entirely. And though neither of them knew it, the secret she carried was already binding their lives in ways no policy or promotion ever could. The night of the Voss Foundation Charity Gala arrived with the first snowfall of winter, soft flakes drifting through the amber glow of city lights. For the first time in years, Ethan Voss was attending the event that had once defined his and Elena's shared legacy. The ballroom at the Aurora Grand shimmered under chandeliers that looked like frozen constellations. Strings played low and elegant near the stage. 1,000 faces turned whenever a camera flashed, executives, donors, politicians, all dressed in silk and confidence. And among them, standing at the grand staircase's base, was Clara Wynne, wearing a navy gown that moved like liquid shadow. Patricia from HR had helped her choose it, an empire waist design that skimmed gently over her small bump. At 14 weeks, the pregnancy was still discreet. To anyone else, the dress was simply graceful. But to Clara, it was armor. Every movement tonight felt like walking a tightrope between revelation and ruin. "Are you ready?" a familiar voice asked behind her. Clara turned to find Ethan descending the staircase. His tuxedo fit like something out of a painting, his expression composed, but his eyes, always those eyes, held that same quiet storm she'd come to know. "You look," he paused, as if language failed him. "Remarkable." Clara's breath hitched. "Thank you, Mr. Voss." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "At least for tonight." Her lips curved despite her nerves. "Then you'd better start calling me Clara." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his usually severe face. "Deal." The car ride, the small talk, the glances that lingered too long, it all felt like a fragile truce between professionalism and something deeper neither dared name. Inside the ballroom, whispers followed them. Ethan Voss, the widower CEO, hadn't attended a gala in years, and now he'd arrived with an unfamiliar woman at his side. Clara felt the eyes, the curiosity, the speculation cloaked in civility. She tried to focus on her duties. Introducing key donors, managing conversations, steering him smoothly through social obligations. Ethan, for his part, seemed calmer than she expected. But when the host announced the dedication segment, the Elena Voss Memorial Pediatric Wing, she saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the faint tremor in his hand. As the screens around the ballroom filled with images, Elena smiling beside hospital beds, hugging children, cutting ribbons, Clara felt something ache inside her. The pain in Ethan's expression was raw and unguarded. Without thinking, she placed her hand lightly over his beneath the table. He didn't pull away. When he finally rose to accept the award, his composure returned, but there was warmth in his eyes now, directed not at the crowd, but at her. "Thank you," he began, voice steady but low. "When my late wife, Elena, began this foundation, she believed compassion was not a transaction, it was a duty. For 2 years after losing her, I thought writing checks was enough. But recently, I was reminded that true compassion must act, not observe." He paused, gaze drifting toward Clara. "Sometimes the person who teaches us that isn't standing on a stage. Sometimes she's just there, quietly carrying the weight of others, reminding us what strength looks like." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara felt the burn of 100 eyes turning toward her. Ethan concluded the speech with a promise of new funding initiatives, programs for families with chronically ill children, inspired, though he didn't say it outright, by her and Noah. The applause was thunderous. When he returned to the table, Clara leaned toward him, her voice barely audible over the clapping. "That was beautiful." He turned to her, eyes soft. It was the truth. For a fleeting moment, the world around them vanished, no guests, no whispers, just the two of them suspended in that fragile, wordless understanding. Then, it happened. A sharp pain bloomed low in Clara's abdomen, sudden, startling. She gasped quietly, her hand flying instinctively to her stomach. Ethan's smile vanished. "Clara?" Her eyes widened in alarm. The baby had kicked for the first time. A small, miraculous flutter, but in this moment, it felt like thunder. She saw the realization dawn in his face, the way his eyes dropped to her hand, then back to her pale expression. Confusion. Shock. Then something colder, calculation giving way to silence. The air between them fractured. She tried to stand, dizzy with panic. "Excuse me, I need a moment." Ethan rose instantly, following her out of the ballroom before anyone else noticed. They reached the side corridor near the coat room, quiet except for the muffled hum of music. Clara gripped the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm fine," she whispered. Ethan's voice was low, steady, but there was a razor edge beneath it. "You're pregnant." The words hung there, echoing. Clara's throat tightened. There was no use denying it anymore. "Yes," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I am." A silence heavier than any accusation fell between them. "How far along?" "4 months." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling as though struck. "You should have told me." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I wanted to, but I was afraid. Afraid of losing the job, the insurance, the stability. Everything depends on this, Ethan. My brother's treatment, my rent, my life." His jaw tightened. "You think I would have fired you for being pregnant?" "I don't know what to think anymore," she said, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've spent the last year being punished for every choice I didn't have. I couldn't risk this, too." For a long moment, neither spoke. The muffled applause from inside felt cruelly distant. Ethan turned away, running a hand through his hair. When he finally looked back, his expression had hardened into something unreadable. "We'll talk about this Monday," he said quietly. "Right now, let's get you home." "Ethan. Please." His voice was gentler now but distant. "Just, let me take you home." The car ride was silent. Outside, snow fell heavier now, soft flakes melting against the tinted glass. Clara sat rigid beside him, hands clasped over her stomach, the weight of her secret finally out and yet heavier than ever. When they reached her apartment building, he stepped out first, offering a hand she didn't take. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, tone measured, formal. "Rest this weekend. We'll discuss your situation next week." The words landed like frost. Clara nodded, unable to speak. "Good night, Mr. Voss." He hesitated, just a flicker of regret in his eyes, before returning to the car. As the vehicle pulled away, Clara stood in the swirling snow, her gown brushing against the slush, her heart breaking in silence. Inside the car, Ethan sat motionless, staring at the reflection of his own hollow face in the window. The date glowed on his phone screen, the anniversary of the day Elena had told him she was pregnant, weeks before her diagnosis. The same cruel circle had found him again. He closed his eyes, a single thought echoing through the storm outside. Why does every second chance begin with pain? Snow still covered the city when Monday arrived, its pale hush at odds with the turmoil inside Ethan Voss's mind. For 48 hours, he had replayed the gala in relentless fragments, Clara's sudden confession, the tremor in her voice, the image of her hand over her stomach. Each time, guilt settled deeper in his chest. He had left her standing in the snow like a stranger. On Sunday night, unable to bear the silence, he'd opened the file marked Voss Dynamics parental leave policies on his laptop, a document he hadn't looked at since inheriting the company. What he found embarrassed him. 2 weeks of unpaid leave. No medical coverage for dependents beyond the employee's spouse. A system built by his father's generation, one that assumed workers existed only to serve the company. By dawn, he'd written a 12-page reform proposal. Now, as the morning sun broke over the skyline, Ethan stood in his office, tie loosened, documents spread across the desk. He had already called an emergency board meeting. The same directors who once admired his detachment now watched him with confusion as he paced before the glass wall overlooking the city. "Our policies," he said, voice low but steady, "treat parenthood as a liability. That ends today." One of the older directors frowned. "You're proposing 6 months of fully paid leave for all new parents, fathers included? That's excessive." "Excessive," Ethan replied evenly, "is expecting people to sacrifice their humanity for a paycheck." Murmurs rose around the table. He didn't care. Somewhere between guilt and clarity, something inside him had broken free. When the meeting adjourned, the board reluctantly approving the plan for legal review, Ethan felt an unfamiliar lightness, like exhaling after years underwater. But there was still one conversation left that mattered more than any vote. He turned toward his office door. "Send in Ms. Wynne." Clara Wynne had been sitting outside his office for nearly an hour, her stomach in knots. The weekend had stretched endlessly, every hour shadowed by dread. She had rehearsed apologies, explanations, even resignation speeches. When the door finally opened, she rose, smoothing her skirt over her still-hidden bump. "Come in," Ethan said. She stepped inside cautiously. His desk was cluttered with papers and coffee cups, the faint chaos of a sleepless man. Yet his expression, though tired, was calm. "Please sit," he said. Clara perched on the edge of the chair. "Mr. Voss, before you say anything, I just want to apologize. I should have been honest from the start. I understand if..." He raised a hand gently. "Stop, Clara. You don't owe me an apology." She blinked, startled. "If anything," he continued, "I owe you one. My reaction on Friday was wrong. I let my past dictate my response to your truth." She frowned. "Your past?" Ethan hesitated, then turned slightly toward the window. "Elena, my wife, was pregnant when she was diagnosed. We lost the baby at 4 months. I thought I'd buried that grief, but when you told me," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It wasn't about you. It was about everything I never faced." The weight in his words stunned her. She'd read articles about his late wife, the philanthropist doctor, the tragedy that shadowed his success, but hearing it in his voice was different. Human. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "Don't be." He drew a slow breath, meeting her gaze again. "Instead, let's talk about what comes next." He gestured to the documents on his desk. "As of this morning, Voss Dynamics is introducing a comprehensive parental support policy, 6 months fully paid leave for new parents, plus extended benefits for families with medical hardship." Clara's eyes widened. "You did that because of me?" "I did it because it should have existed long before you collapsed in my office," he said. "But yes, your situation made me see what I'd ignored." Emotion rose in her throat before she could stop it. "That's incredible." He smiled faintly. "It's only a start. And I'd like you to help build the rest." Clara blinked. "What do you mean?" He slid a folder toward her. Inside was a printed proposal titled the Voss Family Initiative, a company-funded program offering financial, logistical, and emotional support to employees caring for sick children or dependents. "I want you to lead it," he said. "Develop it, manage it, shape it into something real. You understand these challenges better than anyone in this building." She stared at the folder, her hands trembling slightly. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said quietly. Tears stung her eyes. I'm not qualified for something like this. You're more qualified than anyone, he replied. You've lived it. She pressed her hands together, struggling to find words. You're changing company policy because of one mistake I made. Not a mistake, he interrupted gently. A moment of honesty. And it's not because of you, Clara. It's because of what you represent. Strength. Resilience. The kind of person I want this company to protect, not exploit. For a moment, she couldn't speak. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as charity, not as pity, but as recognition. I accept, she whispered finally. Ethan's shoulders relaxed, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Good. HR will formalize the transfer this week. You'll have your own office and full autonomy. Report to the board directly, not to me. Her brow furrowed. Not to you. He met her eyes. Working so closely under me, given everything, might complicate things. I don't want your career tied to my reputation or my mistakes. A pause, soft and deliberate. Or to my feelings, he added quietly. Her breath caught. Your feelings. He exhaled slowly. I've tried to ignore them. It's easier to call them concern, professionalism, gratitude, but they're not. They're something else. The words hung between them, fragile but undeniable. I'm not asking for anything, he continued quickly. You're in a vulnerable position. You have responsibilities, a child on the way. I won't risk making you feel indebted to me. That's why you'll answer only to the board. Whatever happens after that, personally, should happen without power or fear involved. Clara's heart pounded. That's very thoughtful of you. It's necessary, he said, voice low. And right. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two people standing at the intersection of grief and hope, bound by choices neither had expected to make. Finally, Clara stood, clutching the folder to her chest. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. Not just the job, this. All of this. He nodded once. You've earned it, Clara. And for what it's worth, I think this company, and maybe I, needed you more than you'll ever realize. As she turned to leave, the winter sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the glass wall and catching the faint smile she didn't quite manage to hide. Behind her, Ethan watched the door close, his reflection layered against the city beyond, two silhouettes merging into one uncertain horizon. For the first time since Elena's death, he didn't feel haunted by the past. He felt anchored in the present, anchored by a woman who had reminded him that redemption didn't come through grand gestures or public philanthropy. It came through small acts of courage. And maybe, just maybe, through love. Spring arrived quietly, washing the city in soft light and rain-polished streets. Inside the newly renovated 10th floor of Voss Dynamics, the hum of construction had been replaced by laughter, conversation, and the faint scent of fresh paint. Where once there had been an unused conference wing, there now stood the beating heart of a new vision, the Voss Family Initiative. Clara Wynne stood near the entrance, reading the brass plaque mounted beside the door. For the families who carry more than their share, may they never carry it alone. She ran her fingertips over the engraving, emotion tightening her throat. It had been 3 months since Ethan entrusted her with the project, and in that time, her life had transformed more profoundly than she could have imagined. Gone were the endless nights of fear and scarcity. Her brother, Noah, was responding well to his new treatment, now fully covered under the company's expanded health plan. Her modest apartment had been replaced by a bright two-bedroom condo within walking distance of the office. And the small life growing inside her, her daughter, was nearly ready to enter the world. At 7 months pregnant, Clara's silhouette had changed, but her determination hadn't. She had built this initiative from the ground up: staff recruitment, partnerships with local hospitals, the launch of an employee childcare program. Every meeting, every approval form bore her fingerprints. Yet what surprised her most wasn't the professional success, it was the quiet, steady connection that had taken root between her and Ethan Voss. He had kept his promise. Professionally, he'd stepped back, allowing her independence and credit. But personally, he was there. He visited the new department weekly, often arriving with coffee and a list of suggestions scribbled in his impeccable handwriting. Their conversations, once guarded and formal, had grown into something easier, warmer. They talked about music, books, Noah's recovery, even about the baby. Sometimes, they simply sat in silence by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city fade into twilight. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. This morning, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. He paused in the doorway, taking in the transformation of the space he'd once written off as wasted square footage. Employees milled about the open-plan office, young parents, social workers, counselors, all engaged, all purposeful. "Impressive," he said, approaching Clara. She turned, smiling. "We're fully operational. First batch of family grants approved this week. 3 employees with hospitalized children already receiving assistance." "That's faster than the board projected," Ethan said, clearly pleased. "You've made this more than a program. It's human." "Wasn't that the point?" she teased softly. His eyes lingered on her face, then dropped briefly to her rounded belly. "You look well." "I feel well," she said, resting a hand over her stomach. "Mostly." "She's active." "She?" Ethan repeated, smiling. Clara nodded. "A girl." Something flickered across his expression, surprise, then tenderness. "You've chosen a name." "Eliza," she said after a pause. "Eliza Wynne." He seemed to test the name in his mind before speaking. "It suits her." A comfortable silence followed, broken only by the muted buzz of conversation around them. "Will you be taking leave soon?" he asked finally. 2 weeks from now," she said. "My team's prepared for transition. I've been nesting in spreadsheets." He chuckled, the sound rare but genuine. "I expected nothing less." Then his expression grew more thoughtful. "You've done extraordinary work, Clara. You've changed this company." She looked at him, eyes shining. "You gave me the chance." He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering in his gaze. "I gave you the platform. You gave it meaning." Before she could respond, a staff member approached with a folder. "Ms. Wynne, the press release draft for your review." Clara thanked her and turned back, but Ethan was already moving toward the door. "I'll see you this evening," he asked over his shoulder. She blinked. "This evening?" "The board dinner. You're presenting the initiative results, remember?" "Oh," she said, laughing softly. "Right. Yes, I'll be there." He nodded, his eyes crinkling. "Don't be late." The dinner that night was small: board members, senior executives, a few select guests. Clara arrived in a simple black maternity dress, her hair pinned neatly. Ethan was already there, greeting donors. When he saw her, his face softened in a way that didn't go unnoticed by others. During her presentation, she spoke clearly and passionately about the initiative's impact, measurable outcomes, lives changed, employees supported. She expected polite applause. Instead, the room erupted with genuine appreciation. When she finished, Ethan rose. "The board and I would like to recognize Ms. Wynne for her exceptional leadership," he said. "This program is not only a triumph of logistics and compassion, it's proof that humanity and profitability aren't enemies. They're partners." He glanced at her, and in that brief connection, Clara read everything unspoken between them: pride, gratitude, and the careful restraint of something deeper. After the dinner, as guests began to leave, Clara stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city glowed beneath her like a living constellation. She rested her hands on the railing, feeling the baby shift. "Beautiful night," Ethan said behind her. She turned slightly. "It is." He joined her at the railing, keeping a respectful distance. "I wanted to say, thank you. For what you've done here. For reminding me why this company exists at all." She smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks." "I do," he said quietly. "You gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone." The wind caught her hair, brushing it across her face. Ethan reached out without thinking, gently tucking a strand behind her ear. His touch lingered for a heartbeat too long before he withdrew. They stood there in silence, the air charged with unspoken feeling. Finally, Clara said softly, "Ethan, you don't have to keep holding everything in." He looked at her, startled by the gentleness in her tone. "You've carried your grief alone for so long," she continued. "You don't have to anymore." His expression broke slightly, like glass catching the light. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she admitted. "But maybe it's easier when someone's beside you." He studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "You're remarkable, Clara Wynne." She smiled faintly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Their eyes met, the moment stretching into something both terrifying and tender. Then she felt a sudden movement, a firm kick from the baby. She laughed softly, breaking the tension. "She approves of the compliment," Clara said, resting a hand over her belly. Ethan's smile returned, gentler now. "She's got good instincts." A small silence followed. Then he added quietly, "When she's born, if you ever need anything, help, company, a friend, I'd like to be there. Not because I'm your employer. Because I care." Clara's throat tightened. "You already are there, Ethan. More than you realize." He didn't reply, but the look he gave her said enough. It was the look of a man rediscovering hope, one fragile thread at a time. When they finally parted that evening, Clara walked away with her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know what their future would be, how boundaries might blur or evolve, but for the first time, she didn't fear it. Because what they were building together wasn't just policy or philanthropy. It was a new foundation, one made not of profit, but of faith, healing, and quiet, patient love. The rain came softly that night, tapping against the hospital windows like a metronome of anticipation. Clara Wynne lay still, her breathing measured, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket. The room was dimly lit, calm yet charged with the fragile electricity of waiting. After hours of labor, the cry came, a small, perfect sound that seemed to echo straight into her soul. The nurse smiled. "Congratulations, Ms. Wynne. You have a healthy baby girl." Clara's chest trembled as the infant was placed in her arms, tiny, warm, alive. Eliza Catherine Wynne. Her skin glowed against the pale hospital light, her little fingers curling instinctively around Clara's. Tears blurred Clara's vision. For months, she had lived with the fear of losing everything, her job, her security, her chance at stability. But now, in this room heavy with rain and new life, she realized she had gained something immeasurable. A knock sounded on the door. When it opened, Ethan Voss stood in the doorway, rain still clinging to his coat. His expression was uncertain, almost hesitant, like a man stepping into sacred ground. "May I?" he asked softly. Clara nodded, unable to speak. He crossed the room quietly, stopping at the foot of the bed. His eyes fell on the child, and something inside him changed, his posture, his breathing, his entire being. He knelt, as though reverence were the only fitting response. "She's beautiful," he said. His voice, usually steady and composed, cracked on the word. Clara smiled faintly through her tears. "She looks like hope." Ethan swallowed hard. "That's exactly what she looks like." For a while, neither spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, but inside the small hospital room, there was only warmth, the rhythm of new breath, the quiet understanding between two people who had learned to carry grief and grace in the same heart. 3 months later, the Voss Family Initiative had become a model of modern corporate humanity. The program's success made headlines. Media outlets praised its holistic approach to employee welfare, medical grants, counseling, flexible work hours for caregivers. But inside the 10th floor office, the numbers didn't matter as much as the faces, parents who no longer feared losing their jobs for caring for a sick child, employees whose burdens had lightened because someone had dared to care. And at the center of it all was Clara, her desk adorned with baby photos and soft lullaby toys. Eliza often slept peacefully in a bassinet near her desk, the gentle hum of the office serving as her cradle song. Whenever Ethan visited, he would pause at the door before entering, his eyes softening the moment they landed on the child. "CEO's orders," he would say playfully whenever staff tried to coo over Eliza. "Everyone gets 5 minutes of baby therapy, then back to work." Clara laughed each time, knowing it wasn't just the employees who needed that therapy. By late summer, the air had turned warm and golden. Ethan asked Clara to meet him outside the office for dinner, an invitation that, even after months of trust, made her heart race. They met at a quiet Italian restaurant near the river, the kind of place with candlelight that seemed designed for confessions. Clara arrived in a simple ivory dress, her hair loosely tied back. Ethan was waiting by the window, his jacket off, sleeves rolled, the years of tension he once carried softened into something calmer. "You look," he began, then stopped, a smile tugging at his lips. "Happy." "I am," she admitted. "Noah's back in school, Eliza's thriving, and for the first time, I'm not running from something." He nodded slowly. "You've built something extraordinary, Clara. Not just at the company, but here," he gestured vaguely between them, "in this space where people can breathe again." Clara's smile faded into a gentle seriousness. "And you've learned to let people in again." Ethan looked down at his glass, the candlelight flickering across his features. "You did that," he said. Quietly. "You made it possible to look forward again." "Then maybe we both saved each other," she said softly. He met her eyes. "Maybe we did." After dinner, they walked along the riverbank. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the night hummed with quiet life. They didn't speak much, just walked, their steps in rhythm. Then Ethan stopped abruptly. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He drove her through the quiet suburbs until they reached a hill overlooking the city. The car slowed before an elegant stone house surrounded by ivy and wild roses. It stood silent, almost shy beneath the moonlight. "This was our home," Ethan said quietly. "Mine and Elena's." Clara hesitated. "Ethan, you don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "I kept it locked for 2 years. Couldn't bring myself to step inside. Every time I tried, I heard her laughter in the hallways and I'd turn back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key, placing it in her hand. "I want to open it again," he said. "But I can't do it alone." Clara looked down at the key, its metal warm from his touch. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I want to make it a home again. Not a monument." They walked up the path together, gravel crunching softly beneath their shoes. At the door, Ethan hesitated for a heartbeat before placing his hand over hers on the key. Together, they turned it. The door creaked open. Inside, time had stood still. A layer of dust veiled the furniture, framed photos lined the walls, Elena smiling in sunlight, her eyes bright with life. Ethan stepped inside first, his breath catching. "It's strange," he murmured. "I thought it would hurt more." Clara looked around. "Maybe that's what healing feels like. It doesn't erase the pain, it just makes room beside it." He glanced at her, the faintest smile in his eyes. "You sound like someone who's done this before." Ethan looked down at his glass, the candlelight flickering across his features. "You did that," he said. "I've had practice." She smiled, remembering the nights she'd sat by Noah's hospital bed, praying for one more day. Loss teaches us how to keep loving. Ethan reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. They moved from room to room, opening windows, letting fresh air sweep through like grace. The scent of dust and lilacs mingled in the air, a strange, beautiful perfume of past and future colliding. In the living room, Ethan stopped before a piano draped in a white sheet. He lifted the cover carefully, revealing polished wood beneath. "She used to play," he said. "Every night before bed." Clara brushed the keys gently. "Play something now." He hesitated, then sat. His fingers moved tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, a quiet melody, full of memory and renewal. When the final note faded, the silence felt alive. Clara stepped closer, her hand finding his shoulder. He looked up, and in his eyes she saw not the ghost of the man he'd been, but the beginnings of the man he was becoming. "Thank you," he whispered. "For helping me come home." She smiled softly. "You did that yourself." He rose then, taking her hands in his. "Not quite." For a long moment, they stood there, suspended between the life they'd survived and the one waiting ahead. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and kissed her, gentle, uncertain, yet filled with everything they'd both left unsaid. When they parted, she whispered, "So what now?" Ethan smiled, his forehead resting against hers. "Now we build something new. A home, a family, a life not defined by loss." Outside, dawn began to break, the first pale light spilling across the floorboards. In that quiet house, with dust still dancing in the air and the city waking below, two people who had once lived in the ruins of grief began, at last, to build again. And on the mantel beside them, the silver key gleamed softly in the. Ethan looked down at his glass, the candlelight flickering across his features. "You did that," he said. Morning sun, no longer a symbol of what was locked away, but of everything finally opened. Ethan looked down at his glass, the candlelight flickering across his features. "You did that," he said.